Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take the most compelling, evidence-based research, the stuff that usually stays locked up in academic journals, and transform it into knowledge that you can immediately use.
That's right. And today, we are taking on what I think is one of the most critical missions yet. We're talking about rewiring our whole understanding of peak performance, of productivity, and really of resilience.
We're doing a deep dive into the science of positive psychology.
Yeah.
And for our source material, we're drawing heavily on the foundational insights from Shawn Achor's work, especially his book, The Happiness Advantage.
And this isn't, self-help fluff. This is a really strategic exploration of how your mindset, your fundamental psychological disposition can be
To
leveraged.
gain a real, measurable competitive edge.
Exactly, a competitive edge.
And the entire conversation, it really hinges on a single sort of counterintuitive idea. It's one that completely flips our usual corporate and, frankly, cultural conditioning on its head.
Mm.
For decades, we've all operated under what seems like this ironclad logical formula. If you put in the grueling hours, you will achieve success, and then, only then, will you be happy.
Right. We chase success because we think happiness is the reward waiting on the other side of the finish line.
But what if that's backward?
Well, the research is pretty clear. We've been running the experiment backward. Happiness isn't the result of success. It's the prerequisite. It's the accelerant.
Baker calls this the Copernican shift, right?
That's the one. Just like Copernicus showed that the sun, not the earth, was the center of our solar system, we need to realize that happiness, not success, is the central star. Performance just orbits around it.
So injecting positivity into the present moment is the fastest way to improve future results.
That's the core idea.
Okay, so to really understand just how damaging that old success-first formula is, let's start with a puzzle Achor saw firsthand. He calls it the Harvard paradox.
Ah, yes. So you picture an elite institution like Harvard. These students are the absolute best of the best. I mean, they're the top 1%.
Their entire lives have been about excelling, winning awards, perfect scores, overcoming insane competition just to get there. They have achieved what we all see as the pinnacle of conventional success.
And yet, what Achor saw, and he was a proctor, so he lived with these students for 12 years, was a high degree of compromise, a lot of unhappiness.
Despite all the external achievements, they were routinely overwhelmed. They were chronically stressed. They had levels of depression that were, well, just way too high for such a privileged group.
It's the sheer tyranny of expectation, isn't it?
It has to be. They arrive at that magnificent freshman dining hall, and for the first time in their lives, 50% of them are suddenly below average.
Right. In this incredibly high-achieving pool. And that intense, isolated pursuit of achievement, it forces them to compromise on the critical support systems.
Their friendships, social time, family
The
connections.
very things they desperately need to cope with the pressure. So you end up with these high performers who are deeply unhappy and, frankly, fragile.
And this vulnerability, it seems to stem entirely from their interpretation of reality, how they shame it.
It's all about the lens. They define learning and achievement through the lens of stress, of pressure, of the fear of failure. Achor tells this story about talking to a friend about students in Soweto, South Africa.
Right. Who traveled miles just to get to a basic school.
And the friend pointed out that these students, they saw schoolwork, homework, being in a classroom. They didn't see it as a burden, not a chore.
I saw it as an absolute privilege.
A privilege, a resource many of their parents never had access to. Now, contrast that with the Harvard students complaining about the very same academic demands.
The material is the same. The requirements are the same.
But the internal framework, the way they choose to define the experience, is radically different. By seeing learning as this heavy chore, they were essentially putting up blinders. They were missing the opportunity, the joy, the growth in the process.
So the immediate lesson here is that our psychological lens determines our reality far more than the objective facts do.
It absolutely does.
That sets us up perfectly for the first big systemic problem Achor identifies, which is this widespread cultural and scientific bias toward pathology. This deep, ingrained focus only on the negative and the abnormal.
It's such a powerful point because this bias is so embedded we don't even see it. He starts with this anecdote about an elite New England boarding school that decided to run a wellness week.
Okay, so wellness week. You'd expect what? Resilience building, mental fitness, maybe some yoga or stress management techniques.
That's what you'd think. But the actual schedule was just relentless. Monday was all about eating disorders. Tuesday was clinical depression. Wednesday, substance abuse. Thursday, risky sexual behavior.
It wasn't a wellness week at all.
It was a sickness week. They weren't teaching kids how to be well. They were teaching them about every single way they could become sick.
And that pattern, it isn't limited to one school, is it? It feels pervasive in our media, our culture.
And critically, in our research, we're constantly bombarded with information centered on accidents, corruption, crime, and disorder. And this relentless focus on the negative, it tricks our brains through repeated exposure into believing that the vast majority of life is fundamentally negative or dysfunctional.
This sounds a lot like the medical school syndrome. It's such a relatable analogy.
It is. Anyone who's gone through medical training or even just, spent too long on WebMD experiences this. First-year students spend hours learning about diseases and symptoms.
And pretty soon they start convincing themselves they have all of them.
Exactly. Achor mentions his brother-in-law at Yale, who, after weeks of studying various pathologies, temporarily convinced himself he had leprosy,
Leprosy.
right after believing he'd gone through a week of menopause symptoms.
The absurdity just highlights the truth, though. What we focus our mental energy on can become our perceived reality. If you're constantly feeding your brain data on failures and flaws.
Your brain becomes highly skilled at confirming those negative patterns, both in the world around you and inside yourself.
And this focus on pathology, it created a massive blind spot in academic research, didn't it? Especially in psychology and statistics. The flaw of the outlier.
The flaw of the outlier, yes. When students are trained in statistical analysis, they're taught this critical but ultimately damaging skill: how to clean up the data.
They're looking for the average, the norm.
High. If it's one of those weird red dots hovering way above the rest of the curve, it's often dismissed as a measurement error. Or it's just deleted to make sure the findings accurately reflect the average human experience.
So, say a company is studying employee productivity. 95% of employees are clustered around the median, but one person is performing at 3 times the average.
That high-performing data point might just get thrown out. It messes up the clean trend line.
And what's the immediate result of that?
Well, think about it. If science only studies the negative half of human experience, the failures, the average, the disorders, the sickness, we become incredibly good at understanding how to be miserable.
But we learn almost nothing about the mechanisms of success, resilience, or how to truly thrive.
Precisely. It's stunning to think about how much knowledge was just discarded because it was inconvenient to the statistical model of average. This is why Martin Seligman had to essentially invent the field of positive psychology in 1998. The science of flourishing simply didn't exist because we'd spent a century studying dysfunction.
And this academic bias, it just solidified the cultural attitudes that are still everywhere today. This challenge to the idea of fixed potential.
Right. We're constantly absorbing messages that suggest our potential is biologically determined and unchangeable. You hear it all the time. I'm just wired to be an anxious person, or the classic, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
And for most of the 20th century, the scientific community actually backed that up. The brain was seen as a finished product.
It was. The prevailing esteemed notion was that by the time you reached late adolescence, the brain had matured, it had stabilized, it was essentially fixed. The idea that adult thought or conscious emotional change could physically, structurally reorganize the brain.
That was seen as pseudoscience.
Or just overly optimistic philosophy. You were stuck with the brain and the potential that you were born with. This belief held powerful sway, but, well, science has delivered a pretty crushing blow to that entire concept.
Okay, so to really drive home how resistant the scientific establishment was to this idea of change, Achor starts with this incredible analogy, the mythical African unicorn.
It's the perfect analogy for challenging fixed beliefs. Imagine you have ancient Egyptian carvings and local folklore, speaking of this mysterious animal, something with the stripes of a zebra but the neck of a giraffe.
So for 19th century Western biologists, this was just a fantasy, a biological impossibility. Hence the nickname African unicorn.
They just discounted it because it didn't fit their established scientific model of classification. Even when Sir Harry Johnston, a British explorer, finally brought back pelts and skulls in 1901, claiming they belonged to this creature.
He was met with skepticism and ridicule.
Total ridicule. His peers would rather believe he had been fooled, or worse, that he was delusional, than admit their rigid view of biology might be wrong. The entrenched dogma was that powerful.
Until they actually saw one?
It wasn't until 1918, when a live okapi was finally captured and displayed in Europe, that the world was forced to acknowledge that the mythical creature was undeniably real. And this stubborn dismissal, It perfectly mirrors the scientific community's initial reaction to the concept of neuroplasticity.
Which brings us to the core counter-evidence. The brain is not fixed. It is malleable. It changes structurally and functionally based on how we live our lives.
This is the revolutionary short course in neuroplasticity. The structural evidence arrived with sophisticated brain scanning technology that could literally watch the adult brain adapt in real time.
And one of the most compelling early pieces of evidence comes from the study of London taxi drivers.
A fantastic example, because their job is so unique. To get that coveted black cab license, they have to pass the knowledge.
Which is this notoriously difficult test. It requires them to memorize all 25,000 streets, every single landmark, every optimal route within a 6-mile radius of Charing Cross. I mean, it's an insane feat of memory.
It takes years of rigorous practice. And what researchers found when they scanned the brains of these drivers was startling. They had a significantly larger posterior hippocampus.
The part of the brain we know is primarily involved in spatial navigation and memory storage.
Exactly. And the increase in size was undeniable, so the scientists were faced with only two logical conclusions.
One of which sounds like pure science fiction. Either your genes somehow predict you'll become a London taxi driver and pre-wire you with a huge hippocampus, which is absurd.
Or you have to concede the radical truth. The structure of the adult brain, the size of the hippocampus, it increased and reorganized itself as a direct result of thousands of hours of intense cognitive practice.
Which means everything they believed about fixed potential was wrong.
Completely wrong. And the malleability goes beyond just spatial memory. There's the powerful case of Roger, the Braille reader who had lost his sight.
That's right. So he learns Braille, and researchers wanted to see what was happening in his brain as he read with his index finger.
When they tapped that reading finger, the brain scans showed an enormous area of cortical mass lighting up, a huge burst of electrical activity dedicated just to processing the sensation from that one fingertip.
That area of the brain, the cortex, it used to be for visual processing, but the brain had physically reallocated vast amounts of real estate to his finger. It was a physical, measurable rewiring.
The implication is massive, and this is where we connect it back to performance. If our daily actions, our thoughts, our practices can physically reshape the complex adult brain, if it's that responsive,
Then our potential for intellectual mastery, for emotional resilience, for personal growth, it's not just malleable, it might be nearly limitless.
the question is no longer can we change, but how much structural change can we drive through intentional focus?
And we can see this physical and psychological barrier breaking reflected in human history. The Guinness Book of World Records, as Achor notes, is essentially a fossil record of potential.
A fossil record, right. It only documents the achievements of the past, fully expecting them to be eclipsed in the future.
The greatest symbol of this has to be the Bannister effect and the 4-minute mile.
Oh, absolutely. For decades in the 1940s and early 50s, the 4-minute mile was the ultimate physical barrier. Experts in anatomy and exercise physiology used all their scientific rigor,
Measuring lung capacity, muscle fatigue, wind resistance.
and they concluded definitively that running a mile in under 4 minutes was a biological impossibility for the human body.
It was an imaginary limit that was cemented by hard science. No one believed it could be done. And then, May 1954, Roger Bannister runs 3 minutes, 59.4 seconds.
He proved the barrier wasn't physical, it was entirely mental.
And here's the most compelling part.
The floodgates opened.
That's it. Once Bannister broke that barrier, the psychological floodgates just opened. Within the next year, dozens of runners repeated the feat, and the record continues to be lowered today. The physiology hadn't changed, but the collective belief that psychological fulcrum had been dramatically shifted.
The realization that change is possible is the prerequisite for performance.
Okay, so if potential is malleable and the limit is often mental, how do we intentionally shift that mental fulcrum to drive performance? We're back to the core concept, the Copernican shift. Happiness precedes success.
The standard, flawed formula has always demanded we defer our happiness. I'll work hard now, succeed later, and be happy after that. It's a recipe for chronic stress and burnout. The new paradigm says, inject happiness into the present, because a positive brain is a high-performing brain.
Let's clarify what we mean by happiness here. We're not talking about fleeting joy or manic euphoria. How does Achor define it?
He defines it as the joy we feel striving toward our potential. So it's optimism, engagement, and positive emotion combined. And it's measurable. He tells this anecdote about trying to talk to Samsung executives in Korea about the definition of happiness.
I remember this. The translator was just completely bewildered.
Utterly bewildered, he was almost insulted, asking, "You don't know what happiness means." For the Korean executives, happiness wasn't some abstract philosophical concept. It was a known quantity. It was a baseline state of being so obvious it didn't need an academic dissection.
And this recognition that happiness is a measurable, actionable, competitive edge is vital.
And we can see why it's a competitive edge by tracing it back to evolution. Negative emotions like stress and fear, they evolved for immediate survival. They narrow our focus so we can run from that saber-toothed tiger.
Right, we get tunnel vision when we're stressed or negative. Our field of view shrinks. We literally stop processing information that isn't immediately critical to solving the perceived threat.
Exactly. Positive emotions do the opposite. They broaden and build our cognitive and physical capacities. Look at the data. Consider the longitudinal study of the nuns from the School Sisters of Notre Dame.
This study's incredible because it tracked people from such an early, controlled environment.
Researchers meticulously coded the autobiographical journal entries these 180 nuns wrote when they were just 20 years old. They were looking specifically for the density of positive emotional content, joy, optimism, hope.
And then 50, 60, 70 years later, they checked in.
And the nuns whose entries contained more overtly joyful content lived, on average, nearly 10 years longer than their peers whose entries were more neutral or negative.
10 years. That's not a small statistical anomaly. That's a massive physiological advantage driven by a positive disposition half a century earlier.
And it affects how we interact with the present world, too. The University of Toronto did a study showing that our mood literally changes how the visual cortex processes information. People primed for a negative mood. They missed substantial parts of the background of pictures presented to them.
They were looking but not seeing.
Precisely. Negativity creates cognitive tunnel vision. It causes us to screen out non-essential data. Conversely, people primed for positivity, for happiness, they saw more of what was around them.
They literally had broader perception.
When you're happy, your brain is accessing more information. That means you spot more opportunities, you connect more dots, and you are far less likely to miss the gorilla in the room.
Let's talk about that positive priming in action, because the evidence is everywhere, even with kids. The Jell-O at lunch study is a perfect demonstration.
A great one. They took 4-year-old children and asked them to complete a difficult block puzzle. They split them into groups. One group was asked to briefly think about something happy, like the Jell-O they were promised for lunch.
And the results were not subtle.
Not at all. The happy primed group significantly outperformed the control group. They completed the puzzle both faster and with remarkably fewer errors. It shows that even a momentary, brief injection of positive feeling triggers a cognitive lift that translates directly into better performance.
And this phenomenon scales up to the highest stakes. I'm thinking of the doctors and diagnostics study.
Right. So you give doctors complex, hypothetical patient cases a high-stakes task. It requires intense focus, creativity, pattern recognition, and critically, they need to avoid anchoring.
That's when a doctor gets stuck on an initial diagnosis and refuses to pivot, even when new evidence contradicts it.
Right. So it requires flexibility of thought, which is exactly what a positive mindset is supposed to broaden. So they split the doctors. Control group, nothing. Negative group, primed with stressful material. And the positive group.
They were primed simply by getting a bag of candy.
A bag of candy or reading positive statements about the medical profession. The intervention was tiny.
And the results were stunning.
The doctors primed with positive feelings, diagnosed the complex cases 19% faster, and showed significantly less anchoring than the neutral or negative primed groups. A tiny 30-second burst of positivity measurably improved high-level life and death diagnostic skills.
So the positive burst releases dopamine,
which acts like a cognitive floodlight, expanding the neural pathways available for creative problem solving.
So the idea that sacrificing your lunch break or working relentlessly through the weekend makes you more efficient is a total myth. You are actually slowing your own brain down by creating that stressed, narrow focus.
Precisely. And in terms of resilience, we see that positive emotion acts as an antidote to stress. Studies using positive films showed they help people recover much faster from the physiological effects of stress, the high cortisol, the elevated heart rate. Positivity literally undoes the physical toll that chronic anxiety takes on the body.
This brings us back to that power metaphor, the fulcrum and lever. If we accept that our potential, the lever, is malleable, then our ability to use that potential is governed by the position of our mindset, the fulcrum.
Archimedes said he could move the world if he had a long enough lever and a fixed fulcrum. Achor argues our potential, the length of the lever, is already significant, and thanks to neuroplasticity, it's always growing. But the real power comes from consciously shifting the position of the fulcrum, our mindset, our interpretation of our circumstances.
The core insight is that our external reality is far more fluid than we believe. It's dependent on the psychological eyes through which we view it.
And the most compelling evidence for this is the power of expectation, the placebo effect, and expectancy theory.
Expectancy theory states that the belief that something will happen,
Good or bad.
causes the same complex set of neurons to fire as if the event were actually taking place. The mind organizes itself to prepare for the predicted reality.
And that mental preparation triggers a genuine physical and psychological cascade. We see this at its most dramatic with the poison ivy experiment.
The one done by Japanese researchers.
That's the one. They blindfolded students and told them they were rubbing their right arm with poison ivy. In reality, it was a harmless shrub.
And the highly allergic students, they still develop the classic symptoms: redness, itching, boils.
Almost all of them. All 13. Their expectation was powerful enough to create the biological reaction. And then they did the reverse. They rubbed actual poison ivy on the student's other arm, but told them it was a harmless plant.
And only 2 out of 13 experienced any rash.
Belief literally changed the objective physical outcome. It's astonishing.
And the application of this in a professional environment is perfectly captured by the hotel maid's study.
A classic experiment. Researchers looked at hotel cleaning staff at 7 different hotels. This is physically demanding work: vacuuming, lifting mattresses, scrubbing. They split the staff into 2 groups.
One group was told nothing. The other group, the experimental group, they were meticulously educated that their work qualified as significant exercise. They were shown charts on calorie burn, cardio.
And the critical point is that both groups were performing the exact same physical activity.
Yet, the group that was informed their work was exercise. They experienced measurable, positive physiological changes.
Over a period of weeks, they lost weight, their body fat percentage decreased, and their blood pressure lowered significantly. The control group, doing the exact same work, did not.
The shift in mindset redefining work from labor to investment or exercise altered their objective physical health.
The fulcrum moved.
Okay, that power of expectation is incredible, but there's a risk when we're constantly forced to focus on the negative, which so many jobs demand. This leads to what Achor calls the negative Tetris effect.
The term comes from the video game Tetris. If you play it obsessively, you start seeing those falling geometric shapes everywhere, in buildings, on shelves.
You're mentally trying to fit them together.
Exactly. The brain gets wired to see patterns based on what it practices. So if you spend 8 hours a day focused on finding errors, that pattern spills over into your personal life.
We see this with professionals whose careers require relentless scanning for flaws, like tax auditors at KPMG. They spend 10-12 hours a day looking for mathematical errors on forms. They become masters of spotting faults.
But that hypervigilance doesn't just shut off when they go home. They start experiencing every day as a tax audit, unconsciously scanning for flaws in everything.
They're the ones who only notice the C- on their kid's report card, not the A in history, or the flaws in a team member's presentation, ignoring the strengths.
They are wired to scan for errors. Lawyers do it too. They admit to deposing their own children when they get home. Financial traders who can't stop assessing risk in every personal decision, their brains are locked into a flaw-finding default setting.
And the cost of this flaw-finding focus is massive. We become selectively blind to the positive.
Think about the classic gorilla experiment. Viewers are instructed to perform a hyper-focused task, counting the number of times a basketball is passed between players.
And because their brain resources are completely dedicated to that counting task, nearly half the viewers, 46%, completely miss a giant gorilla walking across the screen, beating its chest, and then walking off.
They are looking right at it, but their selective perception filters it out. If you can miss a gorilla, what daily opportunities for connection, for growth, for innovation are you missing because your brain is hyper-focused on scanning for threats?
This is perfectly shown by that study on lucky people versus unlucky people.
Right. Volunteers were given a task: count the number of photographs in a newspaper. The people who self-identified as lucky, they finished in seconds. The unlucky ones took several minutes.
Yeah, but difference.
Halfway through the newspaper, there was a giant headline that screamed, "Stop counting, there are 43 photos in this newspaper."
The lucky people, primed by an internal expectation of favorable outcomes, saw the sign immediately.
And the unlucky people, expecting difficulty, they missed the massive, obvious shortcut entirely. Their neural filters just dismissed the opportunity as irrelevant noise.
So the lesson is in predictive encoding. If you consciously prime yourself to expect a favorable outcome, your brain is encoded to recognize the opportunity when it arises.
You train it to be a prospector, not just an auditor. A great business example of this is the theater executive who had a massive inventory of unused costumes, a fixed cost, a drain on resources. A pessimistically wired brain would see this only as unavoidable waste.
But instead, they reframed the problem. They realized that if they expected an opportunity, they might find one.
And they did. They started renting out the costumes to other local productions and individuals, turning what was once a liability into a profitable side business. They generated entirely new revenue streams simply because they encoded their brain to recognize possibility.
So a positive fulcrum provides an edge in good times. But what happens when real global adversity hits, like the 2008 economic meltdown? We saw an entire corporate world just freeze.
That crisis really exposed the fragility of the human mind under systemic stress. Financial losses are actually processed in the same deep limbic system of the brain that reacts to physical mortal danger.
People were reacting as if they were literally being chased by a predator.
And this massive fear led directly to paralysis. Managers reported seeing zombie eyes in meetings. Sales teams stopped making client calls. They knew they needed to fight for new business, but they were mentally unable to move forward, stuck on these mental maps that led only downward.
This is the condition of learned helplessness.
The foundational research comes from Martin Seligman's work with dogs in the 1960s. Dogs were placed in a shuttle box and given inescapable electric shocks. No matter what they tried, they couldn't stop the pain.
They learned that their actions had no effect on their outcome.
And later, the dogs were moved to a different box where escaping the shock was simple, just stepping over a low barrier. But having learned that the shock was inescapable,
They didn't even try.
they just lay down and endured the pain. They had learned to be helpless.
And the human analog is just so clear.
Frighteningly clear. In a noise experiment, the group that couldn't turn off an initial loud blast of noise failed to even try to stop an easy-to-stop noise in a subsequent room. They had generalized the belief that their actions didn't matter.
And in the corporate world, this leads to profound disengagement and burnout. If workers believe their effort is futile, they stop applying effort. They become learned helpless in their cubicles.
And if that's the default negative setting, the tool we need is the counterfact, the hypothetical comparison we make to judge our current situation.
This is the bank robbery scenario. You're in a bank, a robber fires a gun, you're shot in the arm, but you survive easily. Are you lucky or unlucky?
When Achor poses this, the room usually splits 70-30. The 70% majority sees it as supremely unfortunate. Their counterfact is, I could have avoided the bank entirely. I should be completely unharmed. Their mindset focuses on the slight deviation from a perfect outcome.
And the 30%.
They see it as fortunate. Their counterfact is, I could have been shot in the head and died. They compare the current outcome to a much worse alternative. The same objective event, a minor gunshot wound, produces two radically different emotional and physiological responses.
The crucial actionable insight here is that since counterfacts are hypothetical, we can consciously select a positive one. We can choose the comparison that makes us feel fortunate and motivated, not helpless.
Because if we consistently select the negative counterfact, it actually magnifies the perceived obstacle. Remember the study where people on a skateboard at the top of a hill were asked to estimate the steepness?
Right. The more frightened and uncomfortable they felt.
The higher and steeper the slope appeared. Negative thinking literally makes the challenges ahead look physically larger and more intimidating.
So the ability to consistently bounce back is tied directly to how we explain adversity to ourselves, our explanatory style.
Absolutely. Seligman's studies showed that a consistent minority of people, the optimists, seemed strangely immune to setback after setback because they framed failure differently. This was best validated commercially in the famous MetLife study.
Sales agents, whose jobs are a constant cycle of rejection, 9 out of 10 pitches fail. They're notoriously susceptible to burnout.
So MetLife hired Seligman to study their agents' explanatory styles, to see if it predicted performance. The results were overwhelming. Sales agents with an optimistic explanatory style sold 37% more insurance than their pessimistic peers, and their retention rates were far higher.
And the difference wasn't talent. It was how they explained failure to themselves.
Which breaks down into those three core Ps: permanence, pervasiveness, and personalization.
Okay, let's start with permanence.
Permanence is whether you see adversity as temporary or permanent. A pessimistic MetLife agent would say, the market is fundamentally broken, clients will never trust insurance again, seeing a difficulty as lasting forever.
And the optimist says?
The market is down right now, but conditions will improve. This is a temporary slump.
Second is pervasiveness. Does this one failure affect your whole life or just this one specific area?
Right. The pessimist sees adversity as global. I failed at this presentation, so I'm incompetent at everything. My whole life is a failure. The optimist sees it as specific. I failed at this task, but that doesn't affect my skill as a parent or a tennis player or a manager. They contain the failure.
And the third P is personalization.
When failure occurs, the pessimist internalizes the cause. It was all my fault. I am inherently flawed. The optimist externalizes it. The failure was due to external circumstances, tough market conditions, a bad lead, a poorly designed product.
And this isn't about avoiding responsibility.
Not at all. It's about applying an adaptive, temporary, and contained explanation to maintain your motivation.
We can practice challenging these negative beliefs, a cognitive exercise known as decatastrophizing.
Right. When a pessimistic thought strikes, you have to challenge it. Ask for evidence. Ask for plausible alternative interpretations. Ask for the most adaptive reaction. You force yourself to confront the belief. Is it truly permanent? Is it global? Did I personally cause every single element of this failure?
We also need to constantly remind ourselves of immune neglect.
Our tendency to severely overestimate how unhappy a setback will make us and how long that negative feeling will last. Our psychological immune system is incredibly robust, but we constantly undervalue its speed and power to help us recover.
So we know change is possible, and we know how to adjust our explanatory style. But when the stress mountain is too high, how do we even begin the climb without being instantly overwhelmed? We need to consciously regain control.
This is driven by an internal locus of control. People with an internal locus of control believe their own actions directly influence outcomes. When they fail, they analyze their behavior and work to improve.
Whereas people with an external locus, they blame fate, luck, or others, which leads straight back to learned helplessness.
Because if fate is in charge, why bother trying? The strategy to shift that locus inward is the Zorro Circle, inspired by the legend.
The legend says that when the young Zorro was overwhelmed in his fencing training, his master forced him to focus his efforts entirely within a small, manageable circle drawn in the sand.
His task wasn't to defeat the world. It was to perfect his defense within that tiny, controlled domain. This is how we tackle monumental stress.
The method is incredibly simple, but so effective. Take a sheet of paper. Write down all your stresses, all your challenges. Separate them into two distinct categories, controllable and uncontrollable.
And then you must dedicate 100% of your energy and focus only on the controllable elements.
Like the copywriter executive Achor mentions, she was constantly stressed about company layoffs, major client accounts collapsing, the inefficiency of the art department.
All external, all uncontrollable. So she applied the Zorro Circle. She ignored the layoffs, ignored the client issues, and focused solely on improving the quality of her own copywriting, her only controllable element.
And by focusing intensely on that small circle, her improved performance raised the bar for her whole team.
And ironically, her increased competence and positive influence eventually led to an indirect expansion of her circle. She ended up being able to influence management decisions about the art department, something she previously had zero control over. Small, focused effort yielded cascading large results.
This is such a powerful antidote to modern overwhelm. I'm thinking of Barry, the senior executive who was paralyzed by his inbox.
Oh, Barry! He had 1,400 unread emails piling up over 2 months. The sheer mountain of the backlog had created a form of learned helplessness. He was so overwhelmed he couldn't even bring himself to open his email.
He seriously considered a computer virus just to wipe the slate clean.
The Zorro Circle solution was elegant. First, he was told to only respond to new incoming emails. That put him immediately in control of the present. Once that felt manageable, his new circle of control was tackling the backlog one day at a time, spending no more than 1 hour on it.
Within 3 weeks, he was nearly at zero. The key was reducing the scope from a paralyzing 1,400 emails to a manageable 1-hour daily task.
That tiny, guaranteed success built the momentum he needed to conquer the whole mountain.
We even see this principle applied to massive social problems, like the broken windows theory in New York City in the 80s and 90s.
Right. Faced with overwhelming crime, city officials applied the Zorro principle. They didn't try to solve all violent crime overnight. They focused on a small, manageable circle. the subway system. They targeted cleaning up every bit of graffiti and fixing every broken window, car by car.
And critics called it pointless. They argued they should be focusing on murder and corruption.
But those small, manageable successes, a clean subway car, reintroduced a sense of order and internal control, first to the transit police, then to the commuters. As they expanded that clean circle, subway crime rapidly dropped, and that was followed by a drop in crime across the entire city.
Small, controllable changes led to massive, cascading systemic achievements.
And the second key actionable principle for driving change, which helps us overcome that initial inertia, is the 20-second rule. This is necessary because, as we discussed, willpower is a limited resource.
We often overestimate its staying power. Studies show if you force people to resist eating a plate of chocolate chip cookies, they perform significantly worse on a complex puzzle afterward.
Their reserve of willpower was depleted by the resistance. And when willpower is low, we inevitably follow the path of least resistance.
The father of modern psychology, William James, he said, humans are mere bundles of habits. The secret to lasting change isn't brute force, it's turning the desired action into an automatic habit.
Something that requires zero conscious effort or willpower. And the 20-second rule is the engineering solution to habit change. You lower the activation energy for positive habits and you raise it for bad habits. 20 seconds is often the metaphorical distance that reroutes the path of least resistance.
Achor's personal example is a classic. He wanted to practice guitar daily, but his habit grid was empty after 3 weeks. Why?
Because the guitar was in the closet, a mere 20 seconds away. But that tiny bit of activation energy, the friction of opening the closet, pulling out the case, opening the case, it was enough resistance to kill the positive habit.
But when he moved the guitar and placed it on the couch, literally within immediate reach, reducing the activation energy to zero.
He practiced daily for 3 weeks straight. The small physical distance was the psychological barrier.
And conversely, he wanted to break his habit of mindlessly watching TV.
So he took the batteries out of the remote and walked them exactly 20 seconds away to a drawer. When he plopped down on the couch, that 20 seconds of effort needed to retrieve the batteries was enough friction, enough resistance to break the bad habit. He regained 3 hours of productivity a day.
This principle is used in public policy. For example, polls show most people are willing to be organ donors, but they're deterred by the long process of filling out forms, high activation energy.
So countries that switch to an opt-out organ donation system where you're automatically a donor unless you actively check a box, they see massive increases in participation because they capitalize on the default low-resistance path.
We can apply this daily. If you want to exercise, lay out your gym clothes, socks, and shoes the night before. You eliminate the daunting choice, making the healthy choice the default path.
Exactly. If you want to eat healthier, put the fruit bowl on the counter and the chips in a drawer. Manipulate the activation energy.
Okay, we've covered mindset, potential, and structure. The final principle, social investment, might sound like the softest, but Achor argues it's the most crucial competitive resource for success and resilience.
The instinct during any crisis, personal or corporate, is to hunker down, isolate, and go it alone. But Achor learned the ultimate lesson about connection during his volunteer firefighter training in the fire maze.
Describe that setting for us because it sounds terrifying.
It's a pitch-black, smoke-filled, burning silo maze designed to completely disorient you. You're blindfolded with a black-painted mask. You have to navigate this terrifying environment with your partner.
And in a moment of sheer panic, Achor let go of his partner's hand.
And they both immediately lost the wall, their sense of direction, the way out. They were just flailing blindly until the veteran firefighters pulled them out.
The lesson was inescapable then.
In the deepest crisis, the only way to survive is to hold on tight to the people around you. You cannot afford to let go of your social connections.
Strong social support provides measurable physiological resourcefulness.
It does. Studies on AT&T workers during massive, stressful layoffs found that employees who actively leveraged their strong social systems, their colleagues, friends, family, they fared significantly better. They maintained focus, worked longer hours, and recovered faster from the constant physiological stress. Investing in people is not a time sink, it's a strategic investment in resilience.
And our social investments directly influence the performance of others through the Pygmalion effect. The idea that the expectations we hold about our colleagues, even if unspoken, can make those expectations a reality.
The classic demonstration is the Rosenthal and Jacobson study, often called the O. Henry twist. Teachers were told that certain randomly selected students, Sam, Sally, Sarah, were identified as intellectual bloomers who would post exceptional intellectual gains that year.
The teachers were instructed never to tell the students this, but the twist was that Sam, Sally, and Sarah were, in fact, entirely average students selected purely at random.
Yet at the end of the year, those students did post those exceptional gains.
Wow.
The teacher's unspoken, nonverbal expectations, more encouragement, more eye contact, more nuanced feedback, more patience for errors. It created a reality where the students thrived. They became the kind of student the teacher expected them to be.
This effect is replicated constantly in business management. We see it in Douglas McGregor's management theories X and Y.
Right. Theory X managers believe workers are lazy and need constant aggressive supervision. Theory Y managers believe workers are intrinsically motivated and enjoy work.
And predictably, managers who believe Theory X have workers who require constant supervision.
While managers who embrace Theory Y have employees who are driven by the love of the job, the employees internalize the manager's fundamental expectation and become that kind of worker.
And this positive influence is literally contagious because of specialized brain cells called mirror neurons.
Mirror neurons are neurological assets that sense and mimic the actions, physical sensations, and emotional feelings of another person. It's why we involuntarily groan and cover our faces when we watch a rugby player take a massive hit. The pain center of our own brain lights up in simulation.
We are wired for empathy and emotional mimicry.
Achor demonstrated this with the smile experiment. He asks corporate executives, often highly stressed, serious people, to spend 7 seconds maintaining a neutral expression while their partner smiles genuinely at them.
And virtually no one can do it.
80 to 85% of participants cannot refrain from returning the smile, even in a high-stress corporate environment. It's not a conscious choice. It's an involuntary neurological response driven by mirror neurons. Positivity is literally contagious.
Which means your attitude has a profound multiplier effect. Your attitudes and behaviors influence people up to 3 degrees of influence.
Your friends, and their friends' friends. Achor estimates that a small positive change in your personal habits and attitude can potentially ripple out and affect nearly 1,000 people within your social graph.
Which confirms that small positive changes in yourself are not merely personal victories, they are strategic community and organizational investments.
Absolutely.
This has truly been a deep dive. We've gone from debunking the myth of fixed potential to understanding the neurological mechanisms of success. It is just so clear that the path to resilience, productivity, and high performance starts not with working harder, but with working happier.
To recap the core scientific insights, change is absolutely possible. That's proven by studies on neuroplasticity like the London taxi drivers. Our mindset acts as a powerful fulcrum that controls our relative reality and potential, which we saw in the hotel maid study, and the massive power of the placebo effect.
Happiness isn't a reward. It's a fuel that literally broadens our cognitive capacity, making us see more, think faster, and recover better from stress. And that sustained success is built not on relentless willpower, but on strategic action.
Right. Shrinking the focus to a manageable Zorro circle to build momentum, and manipulating activation energy using the 20-second rule to turn desired actions into unstoppable habits.
And finally, social connection is not an expendable luxury. It is the single most valuable competitive advantage, multiplying our resilience and driving the success of others through the Pygmalion effect and emotional contagion.
The ultimate definition of happiness we take away today is not the belief that we don't need to change, but the powerful realization that we fundamentally can change.
And this realization brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider and explore on your own. We talked about how redefining work as exercise can lead to literal weight loss and lower blood pressure. The most successful people are those who adopt a mindset that allows them to use the same units of time given to everyone, but become exponentially more efficient and productive.
So, given the proven power of the fulcrum to change our objective reality, making us healthier, more creative, seeing more opportunities, what one activity are you currently defining as a waste of time, a constraint, or an unavoidable chore that you could intentionally redefine?
Redefine as a strategic investment that fuels your success.
Think about the hours spent on family dinner, or watching a beloved movie, or a dedicated hour of exercise. If you stop seeing that activity as a time suck or a task to be endured, and instead see it as a necessary recharge.
A recharge that magnifies your professional capacity, creativity, and resilience the next day. How does that fundamentally change your daily calculus?
It's a question worth pondering.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time.